What happened? Where are we going? Okay, everybody. Anne's here. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another London Excel meetup. And for this one, we have Chandoo. As you can see that beautiful picture on the slide there. He doesn't look like that at the moment. So see if you can spot him in the crowd. And we're going to be talking about dashboards and some ideas between turning ugly reports into beautiful dashboards. Just before we get started with that, just got to go through some typical housekeeping and letting you know about the schedule of events coming up. So a few things, especially for those who are new to Zoom. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a small toolbar, which looks like that first picture. And in that toolbar, the most important button is the chat button. That will open a chat window, which is already active. So feel free to check out. People are saying hello and asking questions in there. Feel free to ask questions yourself. We will try and answer them or send them on to Chandoo to answer at the end of his presentation. One thing to be careful of in there is that little drop down saying everyone, because if somebody private messages you, directly messages you, that will automatically change to their name. So just be careful that that's either got someone's name or says everyone before you send your message. You'll send it to the right person or whatnot. Aside from that, it's just enjoying the show. Upcoming events. Woohoo! Faraz is next up, and Faraz is on this call right now. He will be talking about dynamic reports with Power Query, and that is happening on the 26th of May, which is a Tuesday. So I like to mix up the days we do this stuff so that people can make as much as they can. At the same time of 6 o'clock UK time. After that, we've got Gashpa, Kamenshek, magic of lists with Power Query, more Power Query. So especially good for those of you who may not dabble too much with it, because you should do. And that will be coming on Thursday, the 11th of June. So every other week, bi-weekly, at the moment, we've got the next few events. 6 o'clock again, UK time. And then after that, we've got Bob Umlas showing some tips and tricks. Another 2 weeks later, back onto the Tuesday this time, same old time of 6 o'clock. Same stuff as we always do over Zoom like we are right now, same setup. And also going live on YouTube. So everything is always recorded and you'll have links to that if you need to rewatch stuff or if life happens and you miss it for any reason. Excellent. So a few things on upcoming events there. Just before I hand over to the man, just wanted to say it's a privilege to welcome Chandoo here today. And just like, was it Danielle last time? It was at last meetup, wasn't it? Chandoo is getting up at the crack of dawn. It's just gone 5 AM for Chandoo in Wellington at the moment. And he is someone who I personally have followed his blog for a long, long time. Well before Excel had some ifs and when it had 65,000 rows and all this jazz. Back in those troublesome old days. So much so that back in 2010, I was mentioned on his blog. And there's a snapshot of me creating a World Cup planner back in 2010 and getting a mention from the great man himself. I was pretty chuffed to do that. And I was fortunate enough to meet him in person last year as well in Amsterdam, and then Oz photobombed. But there you go. Chandoo went to get a cup of coffee and I hijacked it. It's the best chance. One last thing before we get going. A lot of you already know this because a lot of you on this call were involved and have contributed to this course. And also a lot of you are regulars and will have heard me talk about this. But if you're not aware, or if you haven't enrolled yet, there is an Excel tips course by the experts, 26 of them. A lot of them involved in this call right now, such as Celia and Chandoo himself and Anne, and the list goes on, Faraz. And it's over 5 hours of content on Excel tips. It's not a structured course going from like 0 to expert. It's just a bunch of tips, but it's a ton of knowledge and it's only €10/$/pounds. So it's a bargain. And with that, you get access to the course and 100% of it goes to charity. The charity being Goal, who specialize in emergency situations like this in developing countries, making sure they've got what they need in respect of PPE, but also basic things that we might take for granted, such as shelter and hygiene and water and that kind of thing. So please follow that link. We'll get that in the chat window. Oh, Paul has already done it. There's a link in the chat window. We can follow that. It's only available to enroll up to the 19th of May. So 6 days. So make sure you get that done. It's a win-win situation, over 5 hours of Excel content, Excel goodies, and you're making a difference. So why the heck not? All right. Let me get rid of this gear. Where's my stop sharing? Cool. Should be back to normal screen. Chandoo, you ready to rock and roll, mate?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Alan. Thanks for that introduction. It's really a pleasure and an honor to speak to the London Excel group. And yeah, as you could see, I'm already here with my coffee and everything. Let's get this going. I will start with a small presentation. This is actually quite different from most of the other meetups or online events that I do, where I usually focus on building something with Excel. In this one, I have already built it. So I'm going to talk about design best practice and key ideas that you need to keep in mind when you are either building a dashboard or taking something that is existing and you want to improve that for an end user or audience perspective. So I will use PowerPoint slides to drive the entire message. Meanwhile, from time to time, we will switch to the Excel workbook where those dashboards are already built. Although I'm using Excel as a medium here, you can use same ideas on Power BI or Tableau or whatever may be the tool of choice that you're using to build these dashboards, because those principles are pretty much universal and you should apply them everywhere. Okay, let's start with PowerPoint. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen. So I just have a couple of slides where I introduce, but Alan has already done a great job of telling about me, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But those of you who may not know, I run a website called Chandoo.org, where my mission is to make people awesome in Excel. I'm originally from India, but we have moved to Wellington, New Zealand about 3.5, 4 years ago now, and have been living here for now. You can know more from my website or on Twitter or YouTube or other social media places. This is my family now. Normally, wherever I go, I take them along. I was actually planning to bring them to either UK or because there is supposed to be the Global Excel Summit that was supposed to happen in UK a couple of weeks ago, but because of this COVID crisis, now all these events are postponed or cancelled. So I thought, you could go and say hello to them. If it's actually after a couple of hours, I would have invited them to come over and say hello to you on camera, but they're all sound asleep. So I thought I'll show a picture of them to you. This is my daughter Nakshatra and Nishant. This is my son. They're twins, and my wife Jo. Now you might be thinking, hey, you don't look like that in the camera. What's happening? So let's fix that. Uh, I don't have a latest picture with my family with my beard. So that's me. And let's get into the topic of the day, which is how do you turn an ugly or maybe functional but not really informative or pretty dashboard into something that is beautiful and insightful. So what I have is two snapshots. The one on the left is you could think of this like a call center monthly dashboard or a report that has some information presented, and most of you might see either these kind of things built in the organizations or being used in circulation or whatever. I have personally seen these kind of things go around quite a lot in many government and non-governmental organizations in New Zealand. So and sometimes I get emails from customers all over the world sharing snapshots like this. So this is kind of providing a lot of information about what's happened, and that's the before screenshot. And this is what I think one way of refining the dashboard. So that's the after screenshot there. Now, before we actually get into the process of doing a makeover, let me share one key idea, which is we are not going to debate the information choices here. For example, the idea is whatever information is presented on the original dashboard, you want to retain that information. You're not going to go back and question, hey, should that number or that kind of detail should be presented or not? Because that happens to be the very first check that you will do as part of dashboard building. So let's just imagine that the customers or end users of the dashboard are already happy with what they're getting, but it's just that it's not following best practice for visualization or best practice for sharing or providing detail, and we are going to fix those gaps. But chances are many times the biggest problem with dashboard reports or enterprise reports happen to be none of these things, but at a more conceptual level, wherein you are presented with details, but your audience are not happy to see that. They want something more, but that's not present there. But we are not going to question that. We are just going to assume that whatever is on the original dashboard is what the audience need, but we are going to provide more context, more detail, more information density so that it becomes better and easy to understand. So that's the left hand side one. So let's take a look at the 5 key principles of revamping that. Before we do, I'll just hop over to Excel so that I can show this dashboard to you, both of them, and we can spend a little bit time looking at it much closely. So let's add Excel as well. So these are the dashboards, and we have on the left the very first one. These are all like live living things, and most of them are built through pivot table based construction. So there is an underlying pivot table for that. I don't want to spend too much time explaining how the construction happened. Most of you might be familiar with the basic ideas of how these charts can be created. But essentially what we have is a summary and a detailed kind of a layout. So we have some quick summary about how many calls were received, what is the total revenue generated, what's the average duration of call, and how many customers we have served in that particular month, supposedly. And some sort of breakdown by education and gender, uh, and how much amount was purchased by those individual customer segments. And then again, sticking with that gender theme, we have by gender how many calls were addressed by each of the call center representatives. There are, let's say, 7 of them working in the, or maybe 9 of them, and each person takes a different number of calls. So that detail is presented through a uh, a tree map visual. And then we have 2 managers in the call center, Bob and Gina, and numbers broken down by their level presented with some pie charts here, and again calls and purchase amount by the type of call, like whether it's a very long call or a really short call, and what happens with those kind of details. So that's the first dashboard. Exactly same level of detail, but a more uh, mm, you know different presentation is here. So we could see that exactly similar details have been presented. For example, this is calls, revenue, duration, and customers, but have added a bit of context to it by comparing it with the previous month and showcasing what happened in terms of percentage changes. And then a breakdown by Bob and Gina, because those are our managers. So I've added how many calls each of those people have received in the last 3 months, not just this month, but over the 3-month window. And revenue breakdown by customer segments here in the last 12 months, and representative wise calls by gender in a tabular view, as well as amount per call by age groups and call duration groups. So 2 different charts. And because there seems to be a focus on the gender aspect in multiple places, I have kind of taken out the gender and put that as a slicer, so it's easier to visualize by any individual gender, um, or a combination of those. So that's the thing. And because the gender doesn't really interact with everything, there is a little bit of visual indication to say which particular parts of the dashboard are interacting with the gender through that green tick mark there. So this is pretty much the dashboard. Again, some of the people who are building dashboards or who have been using Excel or Power BI for a while, you might already know uh, the nuts and bolts of how a dashboard like this can be constructed. So I'm not going to spend time on that, but I will talk through the design principles. So let's hop over to the PowerPoint here. I think I'm better off just sharing everything. That way I can just switch back and forth easily. So the key principles that we are going to discuss are these 5, and then there is a bonus one called personalize. We'll go into each of them. So the very first principle, this is something that I try to follow quite religiously whenever I'm building anything that is facing an end audience, is not using simple numbers. So for example, if you look at this, this talks about how many calls were made, how much revenue came in, etc. In a month. Now, when you see a number like 288 or 1921, what do we feel? Like we have no idea whether this is actually a good number or a bad number, or whether this number is in line with the expectations or not. None of that context is provided. So whenever you are building any business reports, you should be always looking for a way to add an emotion to the number. Okay, just by shouting 323 in a dashboard in a big font, it doesn't make the number any better. So we need to always think from an end user perspective and see what kind of detail can add an emotion to that number, so that your audience can relate to it better. Now, obviously, this is also a debatable thing. For example, if you are the call center manager and you kind of know your numbers because you see these every day or every week, then you have an intuition of what is a good number of calls or what is a good revenue in that business. So you need not you should not require full context to appreciate whether that number is good or bad. But that said, most of the time these kind of dashboards are prepared for an audience who are always busy and always on the run. So they are looking at multiple details and multiple reports and multiple meetings every day, and the chances are they may not recollect everything properly, or they may have an intuition of what is what, but your data might say otherwise. So it's always a good idea to have that emotion attached to these numbers. So no simple numbers is the first principle. And when we observe that, we can create a report that adds that kind of an emotion. For example, I can say 288 calls were made in June, but compared to May, that was 14% down. And then we are presenting a number with an emotion. So we can now see that, oh, the calls have gone down. What's happening? Of course, May has one extra day compared to June, but that doesn't really explain why there would be 14% less calls. Is it because our products are so good or whatever? And a similar theme for revenue, but the duration of calls seems to have increased ever so slightly, while we kind of maintain the number of customers calling us. So this is giving you a different picture, right? So this is why it's important to attach that kind of feeling. You can think of feeling by comparing with a previous point in time, or benchmarking it against an industry average, or using internal targets, or comparing with another department or another group or another set of data. All of these are powerful ways to attach that kind of a feeling. So that's the first thing. The next principle is choosing well. This is again something that is very obvious for most people, but you would be surprised how many times we come across really poor choices when it comes to data visualization. By choosing well, what I mean is, here is the snapshot of original dashboard, and you could clearly see that there are a lot of choices that were not made in a consistent or good manner. For example, you could see that there are a lot of three-dimensional charts, and this is something that most people kind of naively fall into the idea that, by using 3D, the chart kind of looks a bit slicker or better, but that's not the reality. Uh, so what happens with the three-dimensional charts is they add an unnecessary depth concept to the visual, and this makes it harder to read and appreciate the numbers in a good way, mostly because wherever this information is consumed, whether it is a printed paper report, or on a desktop monitor, or on a phone or tablet, whatever may be the case, they all tend to be just 2D representations, right? So we don't have any real life three-dimensional data visualization mediums, unless you're talking about Lego blocks or buildings in the downtown. So for that reason, we can't really appreciate having that depth. So there is no point. We naturally just ignore it when we see. So there is no reason why there should be 3D. It gets even worse when you use it with pie charts, because this also adds a concept of perspective, which makes it really tricky to understand blue versus orange things here, had there been no 3D. Okay, so that's three-dimensional, which is actually a poor choice. And the next one that I find is these tree map visuals, which is actually one of the newer visualizations that Microsoft added with the Excel 2016, I believe. I find that this is one of those visualizations that tends to look good from afar, but when you get near, you are equally confused. This is because this visualization specifically presents the values by areas. And while we are extremely good at comparing length or width alone, when it comes to area, which is length times width, we are very poor to visualize. For example, if I ask you a question like, is this orange area bigger or smaller than that orange area? We would not be able to come up with any conclusive answer unless you have some sort of supervision, or you have a notion of what those numbers are. So this is why I find this particular chart is a bad way to represent a detailed level data. It is a very good chart for understanding gender spread. For example, I can see the orange of male calls and blue female calls, and this gray color with unknown or other gender calls, and immediately get a sense of what's happening at that level. But when I go to representative level, I am clueless with that. And this is another chart where the choice has been made fairly reasonable, like there is no 3D, we are using simpler charts, but it doesn't really provide a good enough detail. Like maybe people are interested to know more, but that's not being offered here. So you would have to always question the choices that you're making in terms of, is it a good choice from a 3D or those kind of perspective, but it is also, is it a good choice from reading the chart? Is it very hard to read? Do I need to add labels? If I'm adding the labels, then you need to question, like, maybe I should use a different visual so that I don't even have to add labels, or I can present this data in a different way. Okay, so let's see what happens when you choose well. How do you choose well? This can happen by following some very, very simple ideas. Just avoid 3D whenever possible. Avoid any complex chart types that are harder to interpret and navigate. This can be like those tree maps or sunburst chart. Those are fancy new charts that are introduced, but they make the whole process of working with data very tricky and sometimes even impossible without having the help of labels. And most importantly, measure the right things. Select what is most important for your business and measure those rather than just visualizing some fluffy elements. And wherever possible, present all sides of the truth so that it's easy to see. And that is something that you can easily achieve with tables rather than individual graphs, because graphs tend to hide more than they present, whereas if you present a tabular view of the data, it's easy to see everything clearly in a naked fashion and get a good sense of what's happening. So let's see how all of these principles are applied in the remade dashboard. The 3D is gone from the original chart. I've retained the original chart, just removed the 3D. Now this makes it easier to read. There is no depth. You can clearly see what's happening and understand that undergrad as a group of customers with undergrad qualification seems to be making most of the revenue. And then you can see the other things as well. Calls by representatives in the last 3 months by gender. This is actually presented in a modified table version where we have some bar chart against each representative and number of calls. So you can clearly understand what's happening at an individual rep level. And you can also get a sense of what two dominant genders are compared to the other gender, and then understand that. And there is additional detail added here that says, top 3 representatives take 37% of the call. So that also gives some more extra context. And the bottom section of the dashboard, I've just put only one graph, but that combines multiple levels of detail. So here, amount per call. So rather than showing amount and calls, I've created a third composite measure that just calculates how much amount is coming per call, and visualize that by age groups and call duration groups, so that you can kind of get a sense of what is happening, which groups of customers are spending more per call, and what happens when there is like which type of duration of call is also spending more. So that's that. And then the third idea is not using smarter titles. So this is one of those mistakes. If you use a normal title, the default titles that Excel creates, or the ones that you just come up with, this is how they go. They just give the detail of the visualization. Again, this is a fairly simple mistake that most of us make. We just stick with what comes up there rather than investigating or spending time. It's a good idea to think, what can I tell in the title of the visual itself that makes the visual even more interesting or a conversation starter. So for me, this can be done by applying a title that is a bit smarter than normal title. These are titles that you can either generate by calculating them through formulas, or you can manually type them in, and month to month you can manage them depending on what is the effort required. So for example, here is the smart titles. You can see that we are rewriting the titles by providing some more context, like what is the data presented, is it for all months or whatever. But every title also has a caption attached. And this is saying male customers bring 48% revenue while undergrad education level brings 42%. So you can calculate these kind of things and construct them on the fly so that they interact with your slicers, and when you change the selection there, the title also changes. Alternatively, if it's a static report where there is no interaction, you can just type them over, or you can still calculate them with formulas. So here it says teams and shorter duration calls make most amount per call. So it does provide that immediate summary. So if an audience doesn't have time to read, they can just say, oh, this is what it is. And if they are curious, they can always go into the detail here or start a discussion about that. So that's the smart title idea. All of these you can apply both to Excel or Power BI or even other tools for that matter. Some of the tools, like especially Power BI, make the concept of these titles and captions easier through measures and conditional formatting that is available there. Whereas in Excel, you would have to maybe disable the chart titles and add some text boxes, or work through some of those Excel limitations to uh, get this. The good thing with smart titles is they will be dynamic, so when you interact it will change obviously, and then they provide more detail by being useful. The the next one is, as much as possible, think of having some sort of an interactive version of the dashboard rather than a static version. This is mainly because nowadays we are spending less time printing and circulating reports. We are spending more time sharing the report through web or through files or through email or through tablets or applications or whatever. So all of this means your audience are going to always come back to you with more questions if you give a static version of the report. Whereas if you make it interactive, you are inviting them to play with that rather than just sitting and observing what you have produced. So this is very easy with a tool like Power BI, but when it comes to Excel, we are limited with the number of ways we can add that interaction. But it is still possible through ideas like slicer. This is what that thing does here. You can select an individual gender by using the slicer, and you can see the numbers. You can clear the slicer, so you're looking at all genders. Excuse me, I seem to be having a little bit of cold there. uh, and uh, and then that's updating the dashboard. A little bit of small trickery that I have done with the dashboard is, if you select an individual gender, only then that green tick mark appears. uh, Otherwise it doesn't appear because nothing is being filtered, so there is no need to qualify that this style is limiting the gender. Likewise, there is a small caption underneath that shows showing all gender values. But if you pick an individual gender like female and male, then it will change showing female and male gender values. So these are small things. They're very easy to achieve. The formula logic for this would be so easy that almost anybody can write that. But this adds an extra level of detail and nuance to the dashboard, and it makes it that much more friendlier from an end user point of view. Another thing with the interaction effects is, whenever you are adding interaction, you always need to think, is this interaction going to work out well in all mediums where this report may be consumed? For example, the interaction works beautifully when you are watching it on a screen like this. But what if I'm printing this, right? If I'm printing this, I would probably, even if I see these, I can't really do anything to them. So this is my area of focus. This is why those extra bits like a green tick mark to indicate what is being filtered, and a label to explain that we are showing only these genders is important. That way your audience will know, even on a printed version of this report or a PDF version, what is being presented without having to look at the slicer. So that's the idea there. And then the next one is about the actual design of things. So there is a simple principle called CRAP principle, and it's very easy to remember because it's a disgusting name. But what this seems suggests is 4 things that you need to take care whenever you are designing anything. It could be a dashboard, but it could be pretty much anything that is facing end users. Those 4 are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. These are 4 key design ideas that almost all good designers would be aware of, and they all follow whenever they're building anything, whether it is a simple business card or a book cover or whatever may be the case. And we can apply these 4 ideas to design beautiful functional dashboards. These ideas are not complex, so I'll just go into the explanation, but the name comes from the first 4 letters of these. So contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Let's take a look at the C part. Now, whenever you are building a report, you need to think, how can I add contrast so that important bits are highlighted and other bits are faded into the background or they are subdued. So that's contrast. The important bits usually tend to be titles versus summary, and we can apply that contrast through colors, fonts, or font effects, or color effects, and all that. Now, if you look at this particular report, as I said, it does answer all the questions. So it is providing the information. But if you look at contrast perspective, it is offering a very poor contrast. This is because there is inconsistency with the titles. Like you see, these things have yellow color tiles. And then the quick summary has a different color. And these font sizes are or in one size. And this one suddenly seems to be slightly bigger. It's the allergy season in New Zealand, so my nose is all flared up, and sometimes it is very hard to just keep it going. Okay, so as I said, the text sizes are inconsistent. Like, and you can see this is bold title here, and this is not bolded, and this one has a different color of black. So all of this adds up, and it makes the report harder to read, whether you realize or not. Whereas on our report, it is providing, the redesign report has providing good contrast. We'll go into the redesign report from the same 4 points again. Let's take a look at repetition. The idea of repetition is we need to use same colors, same themes, same ideas throughout the report, so that users are not spending too much time learning what this color means or what this font size means. So this one has a reasonably good repetition. That means if you look at something like the number of colors used, there are only 4 colors, so it's easy to on the eyes. But it's not great, mainly because if you look at, for example, female gender is blue here, whereas blue means Bob in these visuals, and blue means count of unique call ID here, and blue means graduate there. So while the color is being repeated, it means different things in different places. So it makes it harder for us to read. So it's not very good, but it does have some good ideas. For example, all these 4 tiles are formatted in the same way. So if I read this, that's the title, that's the number, I just assume that's the same format all through. So it is repeated at that level, but not consistently throughout. Alignment is extremely poor with this report. You could see that there is all sorts of misalignment going on. Like, these boxes are not aligned with each other. The borders are not lined up. The gapping is inconsistent. Here there is almost no gap, whereas here there is some gap. And if you observe at a microscopic level, there is even inconsistent gaps between these two, and those boxes don't line up. So that's alignment issues. I have highlighted them. So, and then proximity, this is actually what proximity suggests is, if I'm presenting related ideas, then I should have them in the same place in the report. So in our report, proximity is very poor because there are different things that we are talking, but they're not always together. For example, if you look at the top bit here, it's saying calls, revenue, duration, customers. We are talking the same things again further down, broken down by manager level. So this is not having good proximity. I see those numbers, I move on, and then I come to here, and then I try to connect these dots with that dot. So I have to travel all the way back and forth to see that. So that's not good proximity. So a good proximity would mean either these boxes will go up top, or we would have to make a different design choice here that makes it more natural in this position. So that's proximity. Let's see how we can apply these principles in action with the new dashboard that I have redesigned. So let's take a look at contrast. If you observe, the contrast is very well done here. We have everything that needs to have a clear title or differentiation between that and next number is contrasted through different font size or different colors, etc. For example, June numbers are all in big black colored font, and May numbers are only provided for adding that emotion, so they need not be that big, so they're small and grayed out. Chart titles are consistently blue, and captions are consistently dull black so that they're easy to read. And colors are used differently, although there are more colors here because we are presenting that many different data points. We don't want users to think blue is female or yellow means undergrad all the way through. So that's why I've deliberately chosen different colors to make it easy to think of them as different numbers. Repetition is also followed all the way through, like the style ideas are retained because they're very good. And then we take something like Bob versus Gina, and then we provide those numbers, but through in-cell bar charts, through conditional formatting. So that idea is repeated, and the colors are used consistently so that you don't have to learn what orange means once you get here, because that's Bob, and it continues like that. And then this is actually another way of repetition, where each row in the table has same format, so you just read one row and then you know how to read the remaining rows. Alignment is also perfect. Everything is aligned equally with their edges, and the spacing is fairly consistent, so there is no confusion, your mind is not spending too much time thinking, oh, why this line is not there, those kind of things, and you're just focusing on the items in the box. And then finally, proximity is also very good by keeping the relative ideas together, like the Bob versus Gina pie charts are knocked off, and we now have bar charts that are right next to the number, so it's easy to see them and compare. So that's scrap in action. The last one, this is actually the sixth tip, which is to add a little bit of personality or personalization to the report. This is where you bring in your own flair or your own sense of humor or your own perspective to the report, so that it becomes easier and relatable at a human level rather than just like a machine produced output. You can do this through various means. For example, you can add a corporate logo or something like that. Rather than just saying call center report, you can put a logo or a representation or use colors that are common in that part of the organization. So I've done that. And you can even bring in the pictures. It's not always scalable or workable for multiple situations, but here we only have two managers, Bob and Gina, so it's easy for me to just put their pictures and rather than just saying their names alone, and that adds a bit more personality and a bit more relatability to the report. So think of all these ways through which you can add that personalization to the report so that it becomes at a human level, you can connect with your audience. So those are the 5 tips. I know I have not shown you the Excel file and told you how the construction works, but maybe if you have any specific questions, please ask me. But I do have a copy of the Excel workbook for you to take away and tear it apart and learn from that. So I will leave that to you. Now let's take some questions and then see if I can help you more.
Any questions for Chandoo, guys? Feel free to put them in the messages, or those in the Zoom call, you can unmute yourself. Just don't all do it at once.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Sure.
A lot of dashboards are showing either some form of graph, chart, or else single numbers that are in really big fonts, and not really the kind of row and column layers like a profit and loss account. To what extent do you think an ideal well-working dashboard should contain tables of data as well as charts?
That's a very good question. And I think most business dashboards that you see nowadays would have some form of a table, either upfront or as part of the detail section. This is because we are looking at a very, very simplistic scenario just to demonstrate what happens. But even if you take a moderately small call center, there's going to be more than 12 people working there. There's going to be maybe 50 or 100 people working. And when you have that many, you can't really have a representative level detail like the way I have shown. That would, the only way to present that much data or detail is to have a table. So this is something that is quite common nowadays. I'll show you one other example. This is something that I shared on my website just a few weeks ago. And this one is talking about web analytics dashboard, because in such situations you tend to compare more than 5-6 things. So this one shows how you can compare 15 metrics. I hope you can see this. It does have that kind of a summary and detail section, and the detail section is nothing but a table, because essentially there is no sensible way to present that depth of data with any graphs. The only meaningful way to do this is to present that as a table, but we just don't want to dump the data there, rather present it with context and provide details through some sort of spark lines or other graphs that are shrunken so they fit into the cell widths there. Within other tools, especially like Power BI, there are ways to achieve this by having the drill down effects or interaction effects and whatnot. So you don't probably need this kind of 1 and 2 full detail view in Power BI. You might have more graphs, and when you click on the graph, a table gets filtered and it will show the summary details there.
Excellent. People are asking on your dashboard, Chandoo, and you had the manager pictures on the left.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to have those manager pictures change via a slicer selection?
Yeah, you can do that. It's so here, these are just static pictures. There's nothing going on there. I'll show you, because you might already know, but there might be other people who are interested in these kind of things. So I'll show you. This is Bob and Gina. And the simplest way to achieve this is in Excel with other tools like Power BI. This is even more easier. But in Excel, the way to do this is we'll just put them in a cell like, for example, Bob's cell is this one. We'll make sure that the cell is big enough to hold the picture. And then Gina is that. So you could think B2 as Bob and C2 as Gina. And then what we will do is we can say, if I say show Bob, I want to see the picture of Bob there. You can change the cell value in C5 there to show Gina as well. But the whole thing can be linked up with the slicer as well. It's the same approach. So then we start, the idea is very simple. We use an idea called picture links, but the whole thing is like this. So if C5 is equal to Bob, then I want B2, else I want C2. There is only 2, so it's either or. There's no other choices there. But in more complicated situations, you would use a VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP or whatever may be the case. So that's the formula. Obviously, it will say 0 because it's not looking at the image. It will look at the cell value there. But that's that. Now we can copy this whole formula, and then we can insert a name that's we can call this as cell pick, short for selected picture, and paste that formula there. I'll make the C5 like that. So we now have a named range that is also doing the same thing, but it will give you 0. And then we'll select one of these cells, copy that, and we'll paste here. When you are pasting, rather than pasting the cell itself, we'll paste a linked picture. What this means is this is actually a picture of the cell B2. So it's linked to B2. As you could see here, when I select the cell, it says B2, but it is now a picture of Bob. Okay. It is not just a picture of Bob, it also has the cell borders and everything. So when you turn off your grid lines, you just think that you're seeing the Bob picture there. Now where it says Bob equal to B2, I can just say this should be cell pick. Okay, I think let's just look at the name manager here? Yeah, it has changed the values. I should have made all of those absolute references. Okay, so now we have a cell pick, and this is actually just evaluating to B2, which is Bob, and I can type Gina here, and then I'll get Gina's picture. While we are doing with typing, it's the same thing with the slicers as well. You can have a slicer interaction that will pick a manager and will show the picture on the dynamic way like this. This works very well when you have 10 people or 12 people. But once you have 300 people in their pictures, it gets a real messy to have this kind of a setup going on in a more elegant way. Again, out of 300, showing one is fine. But if I want to show 5 people or 20 people in my dashboard, it gets more intricate than that. I'll show you one other example because this is a very interesting question. People might be interested to know how I can apply these ideas. So there is a demo of a dashboard that I use in my Excel school classes, and meanwhile, if anybody else have other questions, please feel free to ask them. So this is actually a sales performance dashboard that I teach people how to build using Excel in my Excel school course. And you could see that this is actually something that I demonstrate there too. Like if you pick top salespeople, it will show those pictures. These are all dynamic. Let for the GIF to kick in again. And when you switch to bottom salespeople, those pictures will change. You could see that on the screen now. So this uses a mixture of those techniques to generate that that kind of a view.
Your pictures are always in circles.
It's a good thing. I mean, what I find is these are things that you should always experiment and then see what works, what doesn't work. I like the idea of just sticking to squares and boxes throughout the report. But when you are adding something that is a little bit quirky, like a picture of a person or a logo or an emoji or something, it needs to pop. So we have to think, what other shape that I can use that would make this interesting. And those circles or ovals, or those are the other alternatives for us. There is actually a circle shaped chart, pie chart, but we all know how those go. So I try to avoid them, but
we've got a few people asking if you have or do use much VBA in your dashboard work.
Not with the dashboards that get published to other audience. So most of the time when I'm teaching, I stick to pivot tables and formulas and slicers for interaction. And maybe form controls. Form controls don't need VBA, but form controls also I try to avoid as much as possible. Mainly because they are somewhat clunky to work with, and the formatting cannot be changed at all. You just have to stick with whatever the default formats for that you get. And I only very rarely use VBA. If I can avoid, I will avoid. So I think in my course, I almost have no VBA anywhere. But VBA is a very good skill to have, mainly because it helps you automate some of the things. For example, I would imagine using VBA in the backend when I'm building a dashboard, so that let's say if I have to make 25 charts and make all of them consistently formatted, I would spend 10 minutes writing a VBA script that will do that, but not as part of the code that goes into final dashboard.
Any other questions, guys?
I've got one, but that's my second question. So is there an easy way to have slicer buttons appearing in a certain order, or do we have to set up a custom list?
Sorry, can you please repeat that? Is there a way to?
Is there a way to arrange the buttons on a slicer in a certain order that's not alphabetical? Or do we have to have a custom list?
Up an index column.
You can do that with other ways. For example, let's just so it's not so straightforward, but you can use a sort by column feature of Power Pivot, because most modern Excel versions have Power Pivot already there. We just don't see that, but it is there. And when you are building a slicer, almost 99% of the time you are building it through a pivot table anyway. So if you add the pivot table to data model as a starting step, then it is already going to give you all the capabilities of Power Pivot. They're just there. We are not using them. Then we could use Power Pivot to sort by column feature to impose an order that we want. For example, let's just have some names here. Alan, Chandoo, and then and Erin. I'm just seeing the names that are there in the thing. So these are the names. Okay, I'll turn this into a table. And then if I make a pivot from it, and I'll just put the pivot here, and then I'll say, give me a slicer on this. It's going to be in alphabetical order like that. Let's just say this is not what we want. We would like to have an order where, Erin needs to be 1, and needs to be 2. Chandoo is 3, Alan is 4, and Adrian is 5. Okay, this is the order that we want you to respect. So in this case, what we will do is we will delete our pivot, and we will insert it again, but this time we will add this to a data model. So this table is now part of your Power Pivot. And then we can go to the data ribbon, and you would have the Manage Data Model button. Just click on that. This will take you to the backend screen within Power BI, Power Pivot, where you can manage the data model. And then you can select the names column and then say sort by column. Names should be sorted wherever they are presented by column 1, the number column that we have. And that's it. That's done. Those things are adjusted now. And if I create a slicer now, this will respect the order that we have given it. So it will show you those names there. It is a little bit of a workaround. And if you have the names as part of a larger table where each name is repeated multiple times, then you cannot directly do it unless you have one-to-one mapping for the sorting column. A better way would be to use something like Power Query to first generate a list of all the unique names and give a mapping number based on some business rule or manual logic or whatever, and then use that.
Any other questions, guys? Get your questions in. I'm scanning the chats.
So I could see that in the chat window, people are asking questions about dashboard tiles and okay, we are still have time, so I could talk about the dashboard tile concept. This is something that this is where you could really do a lot of creative things. I'll show you some of these have already been published on my blog, but these days most people are not reading blogs as much as they would be back. So you might have missed this. For example, here is a dashboard tile concept that I have shared around last year, where if I'm using just cells to put the numbers, then there is only limited amount of choices that we have. You can make the cell bold, make the font bigger, etc., etc. But if you are making it like for an audience and it needs to be a bit more flash, then you could altogether bypass the cells and just make multiple text boxes. So that's what this dashboard tile is. It's actually, that is just one tile with a text box. It's not a text box, it's just a shape, rounded rectangle shape that has a little bit of shading and a word added at the bottom and shadow effect, and then another text box which has the actual number. So this text box is you insert a text box. So insert shape text box or this button here. And rather than typing for $20,000, we say this is equal to that number there in my calculation worksheet. So it will give you that. Now this is actually similar to the linked picture technique, but this is actually linked text box. And once this is there, I can apply all the formatting options that I have at disposal in Excel. So I can make this any font that I want. So I can say this needs to be, I don't know what happened there. That it needs to be 36 points, and it needs to, I mean, don't go overboard, but you could do a lot of crazy things. For example, it needs to have white color with red color outline and whatnot. And it can even have a shadow effect if you feel like that. And then once that is there, you can just drag it on top using alignment tools, select both of them, and just align them in the center. In fact, I use these align tools all the time. They are part of my quick access toolbar so that they're always available. So that's one method. This is actually taking that idea even further by adding a chart on top showing YTD spend trend. And then 18 projects on track, that one uses a different type of really shrunken bar chart to show what is happening. And this is actually using a bar chart again, like that. And you can really go nuts with these ideas. You can use small boxes or other shapes or whatever may be the case. I don't know how many of you realized, but with the Office 365, they have even added extra shapes and things like that, which makes it really crazy to create these styles things. One of the things that I just noticed is the icon button is missing, but it is there. I think it must have been a bug in the recent monthly version. But if I go and so I don't know how many of you tried this, but if you click on insert icons button in Office 365, it is available all through. You get access to a whole heap of icons that can be applied when you are creating dashboards, or this is actually a very good way to add a little bit of visual flair to things. One of the funny things here is cutout people. Now, I don't know how many of you enjoy this, but this is actually pretty good. Like, you get blank canvas people. For example, if you're making a report, she looks pretty sad. I don't know why, but you could put your line chart in this whiteboard here and present that as part of something. It might work well, especially in PowerPoint or something like that. So that's that.
A few people wishing they had your creative skills, Chandoo.
Thank you. This is actually not something that you get. Everybody can cultivate this. I feel like if you look at some of the old dashboards, because my blog has been running for a while, you can always go and see what I wrote back when it all started. So if you go and see some of the things that I published way back in 2007 or 8, you would see that I also built clumsy things. That is part of all the experience that you have when you are growing up in your career. And this is not like a one-day journey, right? We are not here to just learn and be good and suddenly. It's an ongoing process. So some of these things, like, they're good ideas, but also there are things that you could do better, right? So if I do them today, I would do it better.
I think for Excel people, it's all about logical thinking and obviously maths and working with numbers, especially nowadays with smartphones and creating these funky dashboards. It's not a typical way of thinking.
Yeah, it is not, but at the end of the day, whatever you are building in Excel, unless you are not using it for yourself, it is for somebody else. So we should always have their priorities first and think from end user perspective. We are building it for somebody else, so we should be always thinking, how do I make it look good and presentable and informative for them. Somebody says, what does Chandoo mean? It's just my name. My name is actually Purna Chandra Rao, but it's quite long. So Chandoo is really, it means moon. So does Purna Chandra Rao. It means full moon. My mom started calling me this when I was a small kid, and I just used that as my name.
You see the question about linking to graphs through PowerPoint?
Yeah, you can try that. Excel graphs that you're building can be linked to PowerPoint. But when I talk about dashboards, these are not really simple graphs that are stacked together. They tend to be a little more with sometimes interactions, sometimes more calculation logic going on in the background. Those kind of things are best shared in Excel through full screen mode or whatever. I mean, there is no reason why you can use Excel as PowerPoint when you are presenting things, unless you have a boss or client who insists, send me the presentation, not Excel file. But you could use Excel and you can turn that into PowerPoint with some simple ideas like, this is how a normal Excel sheet looks like. You can just turn off grid lines, headings, and formula bar, and suddenly it just looks like a blank slide to me. And that's pretty much the difference between Excel and PowerPoint there. And
What did you think when you first saw Power BI, Chandoo? And you saw that blank screen? Think, oh,
I find that Power BI this is how I introduce it to my students as well when I teach Power BI. The notion that you get when you open, like this is how a blank Excel file looks. It has a grid and it is inviting you to type numbers. This is the feel that we get, because the focus here is on having numbers and doing crunching on the numbers here. But when you go to Power BI and open that, you get a blank slate. So you get a feeling like this is PowerPoint. And that's really what Microsoft wanted us to think as well, I guess. It's more like PowerPoint for data, and they are adding more and more features to make that like that. It's a very powerful tool. I'm really glad it has come about, and it has opened up new avenues for people to build things. But it is also putting that much pressure on Excel work that you do nowadays, because when somebody sees an interactive and shareable and scalable version of Power BI report, and they come back to Excel, they feel like they've gone to Stone Ages suddenly. Like you can't click on anything, nothing happens, and sometimes it is clumsy and clunky. So yeah, Excel needs to lift its game if it needs to match that kind of visual thing. But I find Excel charts are more versatile and they are easier to work with. Power BI has a lot of catching up to do on that space.
Cool. You okay for some more questions, Chandoo?
Yeah. Somebody's saying Power Query, but I don't see it on toolbar. You can blame Microsoft for this because they have decided to not call it Power BI anymore. It's called Get and Transform Data, and you should see that part if you're using a modern version of Excel. It's in the data ribbon here on the top left corner there. If you don't even have any of these buttons, you might be using an older version of Excel or a version of Excel that is somehow cursed by Microsoft that they don't have Power BI there. I don't really know exactly what is the licensing requirement anymore. But I believe if you have like home and student version of Excel, then you may not have that feature.
It's difficult to keep up. Paul. You got any recommended fonts, Chandoo?
I don't really know. I mean, this is something that is an ongoing thing, but I say spend as little time as possible on selecting fonts or colors or anything for that matter. Just stick to the defaults, because the focus should always be on what is the message. So you don't want your audience thinking, I wonder what font is this. Right? So it's best to avoid those kind of
You
things.
know that a font says something about your character, Chandoo. So you've got to choose the right one.
Yeah, yeah. Spend that energy on the graphs and visuals.
I'm joking.
You know, fonts can be.
Where's a question from Anne?
But there are some interesting bits, though. I don't know how many people realize, but you now have full access to all the emoji in Excel. This actually opens up some powerful possibilities. For example, if I am typing a, where is our Bob Gina thing? So if I am selecting Gina, I want to show a smiley face. So for example, if Gina, I can open double quotes, press Windows and period button. This opens up the emoji keypad. It doesn't probably work on all computers, but you're pressing Windows key and the dot key. And you can pick an emoji from here. The sad thing is these emojis will not be in color. And then for Bob, we'll use a different emoji, like, I don't know, that one. So we'll close this emoji board, and then you can say Bob. The emoji also changes. This is a simple idea, but you can take that and scale it up to a different level and use that as chart labels or whatever. And then, yeah, the emoji font that they're using is, I think, fairly monochromatic. So it's either just black or white, but hopefully when eventually, it should get you those nice little colors and 3D shadings and whatnot. In Power BI, it works the same, but those emojis are in color.
Have you got one piece of advice for somebody starting out with creating a dashboard?
Yeah, just ask right questions to your audience. What do you need to see in the dashboard? And keep asking the same question again and again until you get to the bottom of their motivations of why they need a dashboard. This is really important because it's always easy to get sidetracked and build pretty things. But it's vital that you focus on the real business needs and spend energy on building the right measures and calculations to do that.
Mm. So putting yourself in their shoes, imagine you're the...
Yeah. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on in my career as well. Like I would always get sidelined and try to build pretty things rather than focusing on what does my business want or what does these audience want. But once you change that focus there, then it becomes so much easier to make the choices. Like if you know what your audience want, then you would immediately know whether to use a table or a line chart or a column chart. Whereas if you don't know what they want, then you are debating, oh, I have this candy shop of all these things. What am I going to build? And that's a very tricky temptation.
In Power BI now, the user you can let the user change the visual, can't you?
Yeah, I saw that, and I'm actually I'm still making up my mind about the usability of that.
Yeah.
This is I would say it's more like a it's probably not the core feature why anybody would use Power BI. Like if your audience would know what chart to use with what measure, then why are you even required? Like, they could build the things, and you're just a waste of time, in my opinion. I mean, this is really like putting it harsh, but the other side of this is the reality is going to be like most people who are going to look at the reports are not the people that are either good at building them or they don't have the time to build them. That's the reality, isn't it? So for me, that kind of end user customization is just a fancy feature rather than the core reason why anybody would want to use Power BI.
Lots of questions coming through, mate. Going back to something a little bit more personal, someone's asking how you came up with the name Pointy Head Dilbert.
Still remembers that. So those of you who are still here and listening to the banter now, I started my website back in 2004, and that was when I was actually a student in a management college, postgraduate student in management. So I've already done a computer science engineering and worked for as a software developer for some time, and then I went and did a management degree. So when I finished that, I had this unique advantage of having both management knowledge and technical knowledge. And I went to my favorite cartoon toy strip at that time, Dilbert. And, Dilbert is this techie, but he has a pointy head boss who is like a moron, who is always asking impossible things and, just putting his foot in his mouth all the time. So I found myself doing both all the time. Like I'm this manager and I'm asking silly questions, but I'm also the techie who knew at heart that some of these things are damn stupid. So I thought, okay, I am a mixture of those two identities now. So that's what I called my website for a while in 2006 to 2008, I guess, 9. And one day I got an email from Scott Adams saying he's the creator of Dilbert, and he said I have to take that name out because it's conflicting with his trademark. And so that's when I retired the name and just went back to Chandoo.org.
Hey. You were showing us the emojis and stuff earlier. Have you ever used a 3D model? Have you used them in your dashboards?
Not really. I know there is a nice fancy button here, and if I go, I've only seen that once when I tried to create a document in Word, and I was curious because when you go and insert a new document in Word, you get this gallery, and then there's this one there, school report with 3D models, and I was curious, like, what the hell is this? So I clicked on that once, and I created this actually downloaded a really big file, but turned out it's a 3D model of a dinosaur. And so you can tilt it, you can rotate it. I don't know how many people have actually seen this. I'll show them just for curiosity. So this is actually a 3D model, and you can rotate this dinosaur, really see underneath or above and all of that. Well, this is good. I wonder how this would actually help from a reporting perspective, unless you are building something very specific that needs to have a 3D view presented, like a car engine or an office plan or something like that. But it might be really hard to have that tie in with the rest of your data and numbers. I know Power BI does a good job of having these things through a map visual, I think shape map or something it's called, and you can interact with that, and you can click on a particular side of the data and then see the corresponding numbers. I don't know how this would actually shape into Excel. So if anybody have used that, they can share that.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions, guys?
All right. I'll quickly go back to the slide here because there's still a couple of things to share. So yeah, those of you who want to get a copy of the files that I've shown, the actual Excel file, please go to this link. I will paste that. I hope that's still what I have in my clipboard. No, it's not. I'll paste this link into the chat window, and then you can grab a copy of the files. But in case you have attended, I don't know how Alan might correspond with you later, but he might put that link in the meetup page as well.
I will do, yeah.
And in case you are looking for some sort of an online training, you might consider Excel School program. This is an online course that I run where I teach more on how to build dashboards and how to do advanced analysis of data. Some people are commenting, like Anne Walsh, one of my students, saying she loves it. Thank you, Anne. But you don't have to take anybody's words. You can just investigate and go for the class if you really enjoy, if you think you would enjoy it. And what else do you have? Yeah, that's all. I would also want to just remind you that we are doing this webinar just to support our charity codes that many of us have come together and built. This is something that is like really extreme value content that you could buy while supporting the charities that are helping fight this disease. So if you got $10 or $20 or pounds and you want to just donate that, you could buy the course and you are essentially donating the money anyway. We don't get any of it. All of it goes to the charity foundation, and please support that cause.
Excellent. Thank you, Willie.
Thank you so much again, all of you, for joining me from whichever part of the world you are. I hope you have enjoyed the session and you found it useful, entertaining, and interesting. I will hang around for a few more minutes to see if there are any questions, but thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Willie. Can I just share my screen for a moment, Chandoo?
Yeah, I will stop this.
And then we'll go over to chat. I just want to say one last thing until we go back to chats. Where is it? Cool. Everyone should see my screen okay? A lot of questions, both in Zoom, in this meetup, but also in on YouTube. There's a lot of questions regarding, which some of them you've answered, Chandoo, about how you created these dashboards and how you did this, how you did that. So I wanted to mention that Chandoo is also running courses on how to do this. 13th and 14th of June, you can see this in advanced dashboard reporting with Excel course there, which is an online weekend masterclass. You can see a link at the bottom for Detail Productions, who helped me host this London meetup right now. And you can find details on how you can enroll in one of Chandoo's classes. And although this meetup is great for these little tips and there's lots of takeaways, but it's nothing like some real in-depth kind of small class training from the man himself. So if you're interested, you can visit the website at the bottom there. There's a couple of courses running. And I think it's all right to mention, Taya, about next year.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Assuming all goes to plan, next year when we have the Global Excel Summit in London, Chandoo is also going to be running some masterclasses there as well. So even better, you could get the training from the actual human. Like you can touch him; he's real. I'll ask him first.
Assuming we are allowed to touch each other by then, but
Sweet. He'll have a beard like Rapunzel. You'll be able to climb up by then. Cool. Yeah. So I think Taya's going to release dates and more information on that closer to time, and hopefully, it'll be okay to go ahead that time for the real summit and those masterclasses. But if you're interested in learning about this dashboard stuff, which a lot of you have mentioned, then yeah, that's happening.
Thanks, Alan.
No worries. Come back to screen. I don't know if anyone had any questions or whatnot. Lots of thank yous coming through. I'm sure you can see Chandoo on the chat.
Thank you, everyone. I know it has been like coordinating the times and everything is not an easy thing. And when we have the charity course released, Alan reached out to me and then said, "Hey, can we do this before the deadline ends for that?" So that's why I had to rush together and make it. I hope it worked out. In case you missed part of the session or you would like to watch it again, you can also see this on YouTube and download the files.
Okay, guys, if that's all, I'm going to end the YouTube stream. We're still going to be on the Zoom meetup. If anyone wants to chat here, but I'm going to stop the live recorded stream. So I think it's stopping.